Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, this is going to be fun because we get to do a little bit of inside baseball, but we still get to talk about the things we always talk about on the show. You know, I talk about Young Voices all the time. We have those people on there. This is the guy. This is the guy that coordinates all that. He helps me with that along with Jason Reed over in the UK. But Caleb Franz, how are you, my friend?
Andrew, it's a real pleasure to be on.
Yeah, this is cool because I'm usually talking to you about the show, and now I get to actually talk to you on the show. But you have your own show as well. You're coordinating for Young Voices. Just real quick, though, because I'm always talking about it and I don't take the time to explain it. Tell folks what Young Voices is. I'm now partnered with you guys as all. I've even got an official page with my picture and everything on it. But this thing's been around. It's very impressive. Tell folks what you guys actually do, though.
Yeah, so Young Voices, we work with young people from 18 to 35, roughly. There's a little bit of wiggle room between like what constitutes as young, but but generally speaking, that's
a dig?
That's well, maybe maybe a little bit. You're the oldest young voice that we have.
Thanks.
But we generally work with young people between 18 and 35, trying to help them get their career started if they are interested in careers in media or in policy or in academia, specifically young people who have a slant or a lean towards the ideas of liberty and of classical liberalism. Those are the people who we want to work towards, and we want to help build up and build their profile in the movement.
And one thing that I was always impressed with from the beginning, your predecessor, Stephen Kent's good friend, kind of got me into doing podcasting and things like that. It's a nonprofit. I learned really quick starting to do my own media and broadcasting and even in my writing things. It's kind of like the gold rush where like everybody comes from the gold rush, but the money was actually in the saloons and the gambling and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of people that just want to make money off people trying to get into media, trying to start podcasts, trying to get platforms. You can spend a lot of money and not get anywhere in a hurry. And that's one of the things that really impressed me about Young Voices is you guys are trustworthy. You work with these young people and you're not trying to take advantage of them. You really are trying to boost them up a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of the components that you're going to be involved with actually is that I'm really proud of is the mentorship program that we have, and that's going to be something that I think is going to help cultivate really good results with really good people. And I think that's a key component in anything that people do throughout their life, but especially in something as dicey as the political arena or in policy and politics. When we're talking about ideas of liberty, I think it's really important that we have really good, decent people showcasing those ideas. And I think that fortunately at Young Voices, we are capable of doing just that.
Yeah, I'm talking to Caleb Franz of Young Voices. The thing about that is that's so important to me is when we start talking about, the politics realm and getting outside of just the news cycle and just reacting to everything, I think it's really, really important. And the reason I was so excited to do the mentorship part of this isn't because I'm such a great guy, but it's because this thing goes fast. And like, we seem like we've been talking about millennials for 10 or 15 years now. Well, they're all pushing 40 or over 40. The next generation's already, starting to come out of college. The next generation behind them's in the middle of high school. This thing keeps going really, really fast. And if you don't set up people to come alongside you and people that are coming behind you, whatever your ideology is, whatever your politics are, you're just not leaving anything if you're not carrying these people along with you as you work. And I think that's something that our politics for the last 20 or 30 years, as we kind of went into the mass media, that went into the social media realm, I think that got lost because everybody just kind of got used to following a big name or following a superstar commentator or a radio host or a TV star. I don't think there had been a lot of mentorship for people kind of more my age, their mid 40s, the end of the Xers, the older millennials. This is something I think is really, really important if we're going to have good ideas going forward.
Yeah, and this is going to be something that we'll get into here in a little bit once we get into the programming aspect of it. But something that I've really become much more of over the past year or two is I've become much more of a communitarian, in the sense that I believe in the ideas of liberty and everything, but I that idea of community, it's something that people on the left tend to like to prop up quite a bit, but for really bad reasons. The classical liberals are always been the ones who are like, we can do this by ourselves if we work together and cooperate with one another and interact with people in our community and people in our own space. And I really think that's a key component in making all of this work, and that's hopefully that's what I'm trying to do a little bit in my own way, through what I'm doing at Young Voices as well.
Yeah, Caleb Franz joining us on Herd Tell. Now we on our program we bring on everybody. I've had very progressive politicians. We have a lot of conservatives. We actually put this program out on Conservative Talk Radio. You're from the Libertarian wing, so talk about that for a minute because I know we like to kid online our Libertarian friends a little bit sometimes because y'all got some
Well, there's plenty
tendencies.
of content there,
Yeah,
so
there's never a lack of content,
yeah.
but there's a lot of overlap to people across spectrum on across issues. Just throw me the pitch for a minute for the audience that maybe doesn't listen to the libertarian side of the argument that much. Kind of throw them the pitch of where you come from with your libertarianism. You talked about the communalism, which I think is a big deal. Something I'm working really hard on of, trying to find that common cause with just about anybody. The whosoever wills, we used to call it in church, right?
Mm-hmm.
But just pitch it for folks that maybe just know the online caricature of it. Practically speaking, just talk about why you're a libertarian, why you identify with that, and what you're trying to do in that realm.
Well, I think the best way to go about it is the little phrase that Matt Kibbe came up with and wrote a book about, called "Don't Hurt People and Don't Take Their Stuff." At the end of the day, that's really it. I can cooperate with other people and get along with other people who have wildly different cultural beliefs or personal beliefs, whether they be much more liberal or much more conservative. I tend to skew a little bit more conservative on a lot of issues, whenever it's like cultural issues or something like that. But when it comes to, should the government get involved in fill in the blank, the answer is almost always no. And that, I think, is at its foundation. You can have a lot of very different beliefs in the libertarian sphere, without wanting to impose force on people, and having people cooperate in a healthy manner, which kind of gets back to the community aspect of what I was mentioning earlier, is really fundamental, in my opinion, to the ideas of liberty and making it all work. If you, it's great. I like the idea of just going out and getting a cabin in the woods and just saying, forget everyone, and just, hunkering down and living out my own life in that way. That's really appealing. But at the end of the day, if you don't cooperate with your neighbor, and if you don't convince them that the ideas of liberty is something that's really important, there's nothing that's really going to stop them from trying to impose their views on you. So we have to be able to talk with one another, and we have to be able to cooperate with one another. And I think that's going to be the best way to keep the ideas of liberty safe and as secure as possible.
Yeah, talking to Caleb Friend. Let's make sure we got the nomenclature right because I think people misunderstand when we're talking about liberty. I say it all the time. I say, I want my general philosophy is I want the most freedom and liberty for the most amount of people possible, to kind of as a baseline. When we're talking liberty, though, what do you mean by liberty? I know it's a big word. We could spend, a whole college semester just describing liberty, but what does that word actually mean to you? Because I know people call it the liberty movement. Libertarians like to use that term, but what does liberty actually mean to you?
To me, liberty means being able to pursue your own happiness, without it coming at the expense of someone else. And that's really about as bare bones as it can get. What that looks like, and how we can make that work beyond that, is open for a much broader conversation and interpretation. I think there are key values that help make that underlying philosophy work. But at the end of the day, letting people live their lives to the extent that they see fit. I'm trying to figure out my own life, and I'm sure you are too. And I don't have enough time or bandwidth to try to figure out everyone else's. And that's basically the gist of whenever I think of liberal ideas, truly liberal, classical liberal ideas. It is the essence of what a lot of the founders would talk about, and what a lot of them would promote as far as their ideas go. It's just getting people out of each other's lives.
Yeah, talking to Caleb Franz. We're going to take a quick break on Hurt Tell. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of those people from the past he just mentioned, because he has a program where he's reviewing those people, Profiles in Liberty, his show, and we're going to ask him about that when we come back right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Having a little fun with my friend Caleb Franz. We talked about your stuff with Young Voices, but you yourself are also a content creator. We call them nowadays in the fancy parlance of the biz. Profiles in Liberty. You do your own podcast. I love this stuff because I'm a history guy at heart. That's kind of like my core thing is history. I love when we explain things like liberty and freedom and our system of government by going through historical figures. And that's what you've really been doing on Profiles in Liberty, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Just for a little bit of background on the show, I used to have another podcast. It was called Liberty, and it was kind of a catch-all on content creation, and I would have interviews, and I would do solo episodes. And then I did that for about 4 years. And toward the end, I was getting a little bit burnt out with the same old song and dance, as they say. And I tried to figure out what is it that really it makes me passionate, and what is it that I can really get behind, because I still wanted to create some content, but I didn't know if I wanted to keep doing that all the time. And what I realized including after some feedback from some of my friends, was that some of the best episodes I did on Liberty were history centric. And those were also the ones that I felt the most satisfied with. I felt the most purpose with. So I decided, I want to not only tell stories and tell about the individuals who inspire me, but I want to give people in the liberty movement heroes to be able to look up to, essentially. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who's featured on this show that I have is going to be someone that you specifically will look up to, but it means that there's going to be someone there for a little bit of everyone. And in the first season that I had, which started in July 4th of last year, ran for 8 episodes of Profiles in Liberty, and that was on the signers of the Declaration of Independence. We went through figures like Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and Benjamin Franklin, and a few other people who, you or members of your audience may not be as familiar with people like George Wythe or Caesar Rodney and individuals like that. And then this upcoming season, which is premiering on February the 3rd, is going to be on, it's dubbed the Equalizers. And essentially it is about those lesser known or some of those unsung heroes who try to fulfill the promise of July 4th, which is that all men are created equal. And that extends to both men and women. And the idea is that, like with the first episode, we have a really great episode queued up on Frederick Douglass that I'm very excited about. And a lot of these individuals, again, are meant to inspire the listener to be less negative. It's easy to doom scroll on Twitter and and go into how terrible everything is and how terrible everyone is. But that's not really going to help promote a healthy culture, especially within the liberty movement. Whereas finding those heroes who, yes, they had flaws, but their underlying mission was to move forward with a better future. That's something to look up at, and that's something to be inspired by, and that's something that I want to highlight.
Yeah, and one episode you did of the first season, I think plays into a few things we've talked about with you today. We talked about your communitarianism and leading into that.
Mm-hmm.
You did the big names like Adams and Jefferson, but you also did one of my favorites from history that doesn't get a lot of play, Benjamin Rush. And one of the
Yes,
reasons
yeah.
I find him so fascinating is a lot of people don't realize later in his life, he became the go-between when Adams and Jefferson had their falling out. And we don't have that great coda to those two men's lives of where they're talking about each other when they go on, even on their deathbeds, they were talking about each other. We don't have any of that without Benjamin Rush being the between on those two. So in addition to the country, he also kind of assuaged what we know about two of our great founding fathers just on his own.
Yeah, that's right. That was that episode in particular was one that was really fun to write, and one really fun to tell, because that's one of my favorite stories in history. Because after the election of 1800, Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had a huge falling out, because that election got very ugly. If we think that elections today are ugly, it still pales in comparison to some of the things that went through that one. And there was a serious falling out, but it was also a very crucial time in our history. After George Washington stepped down, that was essentially passing the torch from one person within essentially his own party. He was apolitical, but he very much aligned with the Federalists much more. From one person within their own party to another. This was a test of, can two people from two completely separate political parties be able to peacefully transfer power? And the answer was yes, we could do that, but it came at the expense of the friendship of these two extraordinary figures in history. And they went over a decade without even talking to one another after this election. And then Benjamin Rush was a mutual friend between the two, and he was able to finally broker the peace right before he died. And it was actually his death that helped sort of solidify that their friendship would continue on.
Yeah, I love how we have these big sweeping things in history, and these people like the founding fathers and others, they kind of get marbleized because we get used to seeing them on their statues and in the DC
Mm-hmm.
memorials, and we forget these are people and these are men, and the women in history too, but we forget they're just normal people, and they had grudges, and they had bad days, and they had pettiness, and they had. But one thing I love about this series and what you're doing with it, and history in general, is if you really break stuff down to just the people and get to the stories of the people, you can really start seeing the building blocks of what made America great in the first place. I think a little bit better than just sometimes the terminology, which kind of gets lost in buzzwords and things like that. But at least to me, I think when you start seeing how these people in their relationships, like the the fighting that went on, like the ugliness of that election you talk about, that election is immensely important on how we had elections going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think things like that just bring it alive in a way that some of our terminology and some of our current debate on things like Twitter, where everything's just buzzwords and hit and run. I think that's where you really start getting a feel of this and it becomes more real to you than just terminology.
Yeah, and I think it also kind of helps give us sort of a template on how we can react in our own lives and in our own time. See that even some of these great men and women were subject to faults and to failure, and seeing how they recovered from those faults and failures is something that is incredibly important, because we have those things too. It's we've progressed a lot as a society, but we haven't progressed beyond failing in our own lives. So it's going to happen, and being able to see how these other great figures throughout history were able to move on beyond that is going to be crucial in the next steps for wherever we decide to go to in the future.
Yeah, I think so too. And we talk about on our show all the time. Human nature is undefeated, so that's why it's important to do history stuff because you can tell how people going to act because they haven't really changed that much. Caleb, Franz, appreciate your time so much today. The new season of the podcast comes out on the 3rd. Tell folks where they can find you on your social media, the podcast, and the other things you have going on with Young Voices.
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Caleb Franz. It's just my first and last name. I got pretty lucky in that in that sense. You can follow Young Voices on Twitter at youngvoices.org. And then Profiles in Liberty, you can get that anywhere where you get your podcast, whether it be Spotify or Apple. It's on all podcast services. So check it out, subscribe, give us a review, and it would be very appreciated.
All right. He called me old and he took a dig at my Twitter handle. That's enough out of you, young man. All right, boss. I appreciate you giving us a little time. You are my superior at Young Voices, but you're a joy to work with. We'll have you back on soon. And definitely we'll be following the podcast because I love that stuff. Thank you so much for the time today.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.